Okay, imagine you're in this really great virtual reality filmmaking class and you've got access to cameras where you can shoot 360 video, and you're in a computer lab each week where you can get live on-site help with software, and you can use VR viewers to see your work when it's done. And then imagine a pandemic comes along and you don't have access to any of those things anymore, and you still need to make a final project, but you don't have a camera, and you don't have access to Unity to make a CGI kind of a project. What do you do? Well, if you ever find yourself in a situation like that, I think I've come up with a possible project that can that that can scratch at least some of the itch for 360 production in the box without a camera, so long as you have access to Adobe Premiere. Remember that during this coronavirus situation, Adobe is allowing students free access to Adobe CC, usually through the IT department at your university. And with a little bit of jumping through hoops, you've got access to Premiere as well as After Effects and Photoshop and all the rest of it for a couple of months here. So do make use of it. And for our class, I want to remind us of this great example that we looked at on YouTube, fossil hunting in the Gobi. This is an interesting 360 video. It's sort of, in some ways, like a little bit of just a dry interview style documentary in the voiceover. To take nothing away from it, it's interesting enough content. But for me, the reason I'm showing you this example is that it's all about the post-production and sort of how to make something out of nothing. The people who made this had the almost impossible job of trying to make a VR film out of historical black and white stock footage from a time when there were no VR cameras. So how in the world do you do it? Well, they did a really amazing job of using video collage and the tools that are available to us in Adobe Premiere to convince us that all of these little feathered edged flat videos that are collaged into this 360 photograph background are actually convincingly part of the landscape. And now, of course, if you look too closely at the edges of any of them, the magician's illusion is revealed. But it's a very exciting way to think about our canvas in video, to think that you have this whole 360 sphere and you can collage video into it to create a world. So we're going to, using the tools that are available to us without 360 cameras, we're going to try to create a collage video in Premiere. So the first thing we're going to need is some kind of background image that we can work with. And while you could go fully abstract, use some kind of tiled pattern or a gradient of colors, or simply a collage of videos, one thing that I think is potentially an exciting road to go down is that there are publicly available and copyright-free 360 photographs that you can find in a few places on the internet, but one place I would point you towards is Wikimedia Commons. This is a sort of great openly available database of media, a lot of photography, and if you search equirectangular 360 or some combination of those two terms, you get a ton of interesting landscape and architecture photography. And you know, while you can't get everything in the entire world that you could possibly want, you do get some beautiful photos that are freely allowed to be used. Now, if you can get your hands on something that is in, you know, some violation of copyright or something, I guess, or it's somebody's personal photo that they took, and you want to mess with that just as a learning experience, you know, I don't think anybody's going to chase you down over it. But if you're trying to make a finished work that is sort of is your own, then it might be a good idea to seek out files like this that that are, you know, part of Creative Commons or some kind of license like that, where it's like with attribution you can use it for your own work. So I found this one. You tend to find a lot of nature landscapes and a lot of interiors of churches and other historically notable architecture on Wikimedia Commons. The trick is when you pick one, the previews are going to be pretty small, something in this case, you know, 800 by 400 pixels. But we're trying to make fairly high resolution video out of this. So I want to download the original file, which is really high resolution, over 8K. And I'm going to click this and save it to some place that is going to be useful to me. Put it inside here. Perfect. And then the other thing that you're going to need is some flat video that we're going to collage into this landscape. So another great website to source copyright-free video is archive.org. It has a huge database of historical videos that are, for one reason or another, out of copyright or in the public domain. I happen to have found a movie from the 70s that I think is a crack up. It's called Buffalo Rider, and it's kind of like a Western where this cowboy dude rides buffaloes instead of horses. So I am totally going to pull some shots from this and use them in our example to collage into this landscape. So on archive.org, you can download these files in a few different formats. We'll grab the MP4. And I'm going to do save video as, and put it in that same folder. Next thing we're going to do is fire up Adobe Premiere. We're going to do a new project, and I'm going to save it in that same place I've been working with, and it's going to be called Buffalo, and I'll hit OK, and then I'm going to make a new sequence. We're going to be using one of the VR presets, and then we'll alter it. So we're going to do monoscopic, and while it's sort of arbitrary in this case, and it kind of just depends on what you intend to do, we'll follow what we were doing in class, just basing it on the resolution of the Views XR cameras that that we had access to before. Just to keep consistent, and it's a fairly high resolution that you can knock down then for export if necessary, if you're going to something that that needs a lower resolution. And we can also use the ambisonic setting just for the sake of it, just as a reminder that that's what we were doing in class, to make sure we could import stuff from the Zoom microphone. But if you're not intending to do anything with ambisonic, then you could just use the regular. Now, this first sequence, we're going to name, and I'll hit OK. And remember then that by default, the sequence settings for this 4096 by 2048. That's the preset in Premiere. This isn't what the Views XR camera puts out. It actually does better than this. It does 5760 by 2880. And so I'm just going to do that for the sake of consistency with the other projects we've been making in this class up until now. Though, like I said, because we're working with entirely inside the box, this is sort of arbitrary. You know, you could do whatever. But most importantly, we just want to confirm that VR properties is set to equirectangular, monoscopic, 360. And then we hit OK. And now we're prepped for bringing in our background files and our video to Collage. So here's that Pine Bend Bluff photo, and I'm going to drag it into our project in Premiere to import it, and then throw it onto the timeline. And I'm also going to right click and have it scale to frame size, because we got a bigger picture than we're actually cutting in, right? So so now we've got this 360 photo in our program monitor. And if you're in my class and need a refresher, or if you found this video on the internet and you're like, wait a minute, what's up with 360 video? I don't know anything about it. Let me remind you that at first, when you look at a 360 image, it's in, for Premiere, it's in what's called equirectangular projection, which kind of in the middle looks sort of like the photo that you expect. It's kind of like a panoramic photo, but once you get to the outer edges, it gets pretty stretched. And in fact, this photo isn't a rectangle at all. It's meant to wrap around our entire consciousness in a sphere. So how do we set up Premiere to make sure we can see it that way if we want to? Well, let me remind you that we're going to move our cursor over to this plus sign that's on the very bottom right of your program monitor. Hit plus, and then look for this icon that I think is meant to look like a person with a VR goggles on, but what it really looks like is just an oval with a rectangle over it. And that you're going to click and drag it down into the other kind of VCR controls area of the program monitor. Now you can toggle VR video display to let you look around this thing as a 360 simulation, as if you were in a headset. The other thing that I want to remind everyone is that I find this default interface from Premiere to be irresponsible use of screen real estate. So I want these controls to go away, and I want this viewport to be rectangular. So I'm going to right click and go down to VR video, and I'm going to uncheck show controls. So that gets rid of those controls, and now I can just click and drag around my image. And then I'm also going to right click VR video and do settings. And instead of this 108 thing that's the default, we're going to do 180 in the horizontal and 90 in the vertical. And that way we get a much more normal looking video proscenium, but also the ability to look around this thing as 360. And then remember that if you want to see the fullness of the equirectangular projection, you can just toggle this on and off. Two other little features that I want to make sure everybody knows about Premiere's 360 video capabilities. Again, right-clicking on the program window, you'll see there's right underneath VR video, there's this Adobe Immersive environment. That's really great if you have an actual tethered VR headset like a Vive, an Oculus Rift, or an Index or something like that, Windows mixed reality kind of a thing, attached to your computer. You can use the Adobe Immersive environment as another monitor to literally look at a true headset controlled VR program window. So if you have access to that, use it. It's awesome. The other thing that can be useful here is if you are indeed using ambisonic audio tracks in order to create the illusion of audio that goes all around the viewer in 360. Maybe you recorded something on the Zoom, the H2N or the H3 VR mic, then make sure monitor ambisonics is checked and that you're monitoring with headphones so that you get that that effect. All right, so thanks to whoever shot this beautiful shot of this landscape, because we're going to use this as our basis for an imaginary collage video 360 world. All right, great. So Buffalo Rider finally showed up, and I'm going to throw it into our project as well. And drag out my background so I've got a little bit of time here to work with. I'm gonna open up Buffalo Rider and see if I can find a relevant piece that looks like something. Alright, so I'm gonna grab that portion, throw it in here, and ditch the audio. So now if I look around for it, like, oh, okay. So when I throw flat video on top of 360 video, remember, it sort of shows up as like a curved, concave rectangle, sort of pasted on the inside of a cylinder here. And in the next tutorial, I'll break here just for the sake of consumability. I'll show you what we can do with this footage to change its shape, to change its size, and what effects are necessary to move it around, because it's not quite as simple as you think, but it turns out there's some really powerful effects to do this.